Good morning, or depending on where you sit, good afternoon. I'm Tom Asher at Columbia University. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this virtual speaker series. The series is supported by the Knight Foundation. It's part of a transatlantic initiative titled, and it's a mouthful, Digital Governance for Democratic Renewal. The initiative is organized by Columbia World Projects at Columbia University and the Center for Digital Governance at the Hertie School in Berlin. With this partnership, we're aiming to identify pathways for addressing the challenges generated by digital platforms for democratic institutions and discourse. And for those who are joining for the first time, I'll note that this speaker series, which is the first in a sequence that's going to be held across this academic year, builds on four previous virtual discussions we held over the prior academic year. So over the last 15 months, our initiative has brought together digital regulators, technologists, scholars, and civil society advocates, and lots of people who are wearing all those hats at once to tackle a variety of complex issues. And those include how to improve platform to researcher frameworks to better diagnose, expose, and address platform harms and access data, developing legislative tools to promote competition in digital markets with a focus on interoperability and data portability in particular, and then addressing challenges in digital content moderation and exploring new standards that balance user privacy, free expression, and community-driven alternatives to platform governance. We're on the precipice of issuing a series of reports out of those meetings, so we'll be glad to circulate them with you all. And just a note, I'm really excited today because Helena Malikova has agreed to open our first session by offering her thoughts on how we should design and govern digital platforms to stabilize and promote democratic practice. And she's making significant reference to her research at the Kennedy School at Harvard that looks at whether companies that monetize personal data should receive or do receive a surveillance premium in their evaluations. Not should receive, but do receive. Just note, a final note, I represent Columbia World Projects. It's an initiative of Columbia University that connects policymakers, practitioners, and researchers to explore pressing issues, not least what sustains and ails liberal democracies around the world, while offering focused solutions for revitalizing democracy. I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, Danny Stockman, who will tell you a bit about the Hertie School that she represents and make introductions to our speakers today. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom, and also a very warm welcome for everybody to the speaker series. I'm so delighted to see so many familiar faces, but also new faces. My name is Danny Stockman. I'm the director of the Hertie School Centre for Digital Governance, and we are a gateway to digital transformation based in Berlin. Our role in this project is to bring in exciting speakers from Europe and to learn more about the interactions on this transatlantic initiatives on these very important questions. And it is my great pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today, Helena Malikova, who is a European Union civil servant with the European Competition Watchdog, the Directorate General for Competition, DG Comp, at the European Commission in Brussels. And Helena is attached to the Directorate investigating foreign subsidies flowing into the European economy. Helena was also previously a member of the chief economist team at DG Comp, advocating for greater use of financial and business data in antitrust economics. She has published on the geopolitics of artificial intelligence and conflicts of interest among antitrust economics, academics, and economic consultancies, advising on regulation. And she's also currently a surveillance capitalism or democracy fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and also a fellow at our Center for Digital Governance. And our discussant for today is going to be Andrea Prat, who is the Richard Paul Richmond Professor of Business at Columbia Business School and Professor of Economics at the Department of Economics. Andrea's work focuses on organizational economics and political economy, and his current research in organizational economics explores through theoretical modeling, field experiments, and data analysis, issues such as organizational design, corporate leadership, employee motivation, and optimal disclosure. His current research in political economy attempts to define and measure the influence of the media industry on the democratic process. So very much core to our discussion today. So without further ado, Helena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll share the slides with you. I'll start. Tell me if. All good? Everybody can see the slide? All right. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me and the team to present this preliminary research. I'm speaking very much in a personal capacity, and anything I would be saying does not represent or is not meant to represent anyhow the views of the European institutions. So indeed, thank you for the introduction. This project is part of the research at my fellowship at Harvard Kennedy School. It is it has this ambition to quantify something that Shoshana Zuboff documented very well in her book, Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which is this monetization of what she labeled behavioral surplus. And so I think in the room today as well with us is the research team, which is Phoebe Zhou, Thames Chamchirai Chamkun, Maggie Tia, and Brianna Rock is overseeing the data work. There will be, there is a lot of data gathering and work going on, as you will see. We will not be able to share much results with you yet, but the initial impressions, some descriptive statistics on what we have, and some preliminary findings. So the context of this is, I mean, we will be talking about targeted advertisement, very clear. Because the monetization of personal data is a lot to do with basically targeting and personalizing products, which has most been discussed and most have been prominently in discussion in targeted advertising. So in this context, this space, there has been already a lot done. There has been research, and often this research is takes the form of experiments where a targeting feature is switched off for a while. And that's really, so a lot of this, let's say at firm level, at platform level research that has been mapped, for example, Gareth Johnson has, I can provide the link, it's in this presentation, has put together all the findings about how switching off targeting options in digital platforms kind of decreases the income of advertisers. I think that this outcome is kind of, there is consensus in the research, a bit less consensus about whether it leads to losses for the sellers, for the people who advertise, the companies, but a lot of research already existing. Then I give you some examples of more recent research. Now, a lot of this research, because of the way it's done, has a problem because of to access the data on the impact of targeting, especially in the advertising space, you have to have contact with these companies, and it's often implemented by the companies themselves. So there is a potential conflict already at the access of data level. The CMA did a dedicated study themselves, for example. I'll just quote here. So they found that switching off this targeted research could lead to a decrease of 70% for the of the income for the advertisers. And it shows two things, this extract, is that, okay, this is a research implemented by Google, which is a bit the problem, like I said, and about Google, and it's the only way. And at the same time, it often captures only a very limited effect in terms of time. So no readjustment here, for example, the CMA said yes, and the other advertisers would still be targeting, would still be giving personalized, serving personalized ads. So it's very difficult to do an overall experiment, and the experiments we have are very costly for platforms, and therefore there is no time to readjust in like the models, like if the market readjusts to a space where there is no targeting. So I think the objective of this research is in the kind of immediate, is indeed to verify against some financial metrics whether companies that are using personal data are benefiting financially. And we will be translating this in different metrics, be it the growth of sales, which is something that Shoshana Zuboff is pointing to, that this benefited, that companies benefited in terms of growth, but also in terms of money, so basically valuations, and we'll discuss that. But to be very clear, the kind of policy implication question is whether it's worth it, what they get, and who gets it, and whether it's worth it. Meaning, is it really worth it, given the income? And I don't want to anticipate the outcomes because I don't have them yet. But at this stage, this is how we will be proceeding. And again, this question of, I mean, we are talking about also the case for prohibiting possibly targeted advertising, which is very far-reaching, and I don't think I think it's very controversial at this stage. But I do think this will inform this discussion. I don't think that there is necessarily an answer, and inform it from a different perspective than the ones we usually get. And the objective being to look at the market as a whole and extract this premium, if there is one, from the overall market. So for this, what we did is that we have been gathering data on all the NASDAQ companies, taking the NASDAQ as a reference. So the NASDAQ is the NASDAQ 1000 composite, which is an index that combines about 3,000 companies. And on these companies, we went through their corporate reporting, the way they communicate to their shareholders, investor calls over 5 years, and we have checked their references to monetization of personal data. Now, what is a reference to monetization of personal data? Like if you check accumulation of data, they don't talk about this, right? They don't say things like, we are going to exploit the accumulation of personal data. So what I figured out was actually a very effective way of figuring out, or of actually identifying through this communication, the companies that are using personal data as part of their business, is just checking for privacy and the way they refer to privacy. Because if they are monetizing personal data, they're concerned with privacy. And this also allows to single out the companies that are dealing not with data in general, like industrial data, but really dealing with personal data, because this first category would not be concerned with privacy. And maybe more like industrial espionage, but that's a different conversation. And so here, basically, we gathered this, and which means that we are agnostic in the way the companies are monetizing this data, which is, so I think going through the different companies, we see, for example, a lot of cloud companies are dealing with privacy. It's because they sell off the data that is kind of on their platforms and on their infrastructure to data brokers in an anonymized way. And I didn't know this was going on a lot, but I realized while looking at some of the communication that it's quite common. And then a lot of companies monetizing, if you want, personal data, or at least using them as a core part of their business, will be pharma companies and companies that are trying to diagnose, so medical companies diagnose disease. So again, we will be catching all of that and possibly controlling for the sector later. So at this stage, very much work in progress. We have went through the 3,000 companies, about 2,000 had actually corporate communication that we were able to build on, and some just don't do investor calls. And out of these, we covered, I mean, again, Phoebe, Thames, and Maggie covered about 1,000. And so these results that you will be, preliminary results or overview that you will be seeing, are based on that. So first of all, here, what you see is kind of dividing our sample into the companies that we have been able to identify as referring to privacy. So this is the red line, and the ones that were not, which is the green line. It doesn't, there are about 100 of the first one, about 600 of the second one. It doesn't add up to 1,000 because some companies didn't have enough data to just be part of this 7-year overview. So what this shows is how their revenue grew. And this is back to this first metric of suggested by Shoshana Zuboff, is did they use this personal data to grow? And is this, if you see my slide, I don't know if this is better. So basically, by the end of the period, we're going to be looking at this period just for this is part of the exercise where we're still scoping about what we are really expecting to see and testing some hypotheses. The hypothesis here would have been that companies that are monetizing privacy are growing faster. So that was the case a little bit, at least in this, if we capture the right metric, a little bit over the period of the pandemic. And but right now they kind of, the green line and the red line kind of are back to the same. These are medians, to be very clear, which is the way to look at financial data typically in this descriptive way. So on kind of half of the companies in each cohort kind of grew at the same pace, and completely out of proportion, the GAFAM, which we will be dealing with separately, as you will see throughout the presentation, grew much faster. So this is the growth of sales. So how much did they sell to consumers? And the second metric we'll be looking at now immediately is the market capitalization of these companies, meaning how much these companies were kind of able to monetize that in the view of their shareholders. how much of the sales in terms of profits and future profits were they able to keep. So this is the second chart. And this is for the same sort of period. So we always see this is market capitalization. So in the Q1 2018, you would have kind of got through the results from 2017. So it's kind of a little bit staggered in time, but that's just because some accounting data has a time lag versus this kind of market capitalization data. And so here we do see a little bit more of discrepancy between, especially over the same period, between companies that were in our view, monetizing personal data that would have had a premium, right, in terms of their market capitalization, of the growth of their market capitalization over this period. And then again, the premium kind of disappears by the end of the period, and the GAFAM again stay kind of well off. Should I pause if there is any?
No, I think we're going to start the Q&A later, so please continue.
Okay. So basically, and like I introduced, this was agnostic. Here it's agnostic to the sector. Okay, and there is of course a self-selection because the Nasdaq is tech heavy, and also the privacy companies will be kind of people discussing privacy. There will be an overrepresentation that we see of the tech sector. But from here, I also did this version, which is just the tech sector. So this is just the tech sector out of the green and the red line, where the red dotted line here is the tech companies talking about privacy, and the green line is the other company, is the tech companies not talking about privacy, so not being concerned about privacy, assumingly not being intensely involved in personal data monetization. And here it even gets, not only the premium is kind of lost, but by the end of the period, it's almost a malus to have been monetizing personal data if you're not big, if you're not GAFAM. So this is one kind of possible reading, and we are running the numbers now. By the end of this, I'll give you a little bit of the first sense. We are confirming some of these impressions in the data in the panel analysis. So from here, I want to go to like checking this against reality. So this is here. Also pre-warning, you will see a lot of Bloomberg slides, but this is the first one. So this is here what I've been seeing a lot when I've been analyzing these privacy companies. So I took among the bigger ones, market capitalizations in this privacy cohort, so tech companies monetizing by this test personal data, and their evolution of this is shares, but it could be market caps. Market capitalization is basically shares adjusted to the size of the company. And so here, this is companies called AppLovin, Match Group, Jamf, Concentrix, and Zoom Information. They're all kind of part of this advertisement stack in one way or another, or in basically targeted and data analytics when it comes to personal data. That would be Jamf. So I've been seeing a lot of this. Each time I looked at the companies in this sample, I've been seeing like a lot of companies introduced on the stock market. So some of them, for example, AppLovin was introduced here in 2021, going up and then kind of going down. And so I was a bit like, okay, this is, this was not a crisis years. Like there were other crises, but not a stock exchange crisis. So this was surprising. So if you compare this to the GAFAM, it was kind of like they were not challenged in the same way. So the GAFAM were kind of doing great. So I will further explore this to understand how we kind of gather data around what we see and how we could start to explain it. So here is, for example, the most of the companies that coming back from these smaller privacy monetization companies had, you will see this through the presentation, they had really this, they looked like this. So meaning this is 5 years of their market capitalization, which is the white line, which means the value of their company. They're introduced here, in this case, they were introduced a bit earlier, they go up and they go down. But what is surprising to me as a financial analyst was that their sales, which is the blue line, so their revenue, was not going down. And okay, this is just one example, but you will see that this happened a lot. So this company, which is called Catalytics, is actually providing, I think we get to that. So is providing, let me compare to, so this is how I would expect it to look. And this was one of the companies who also is referring to privacy in our data set, but it's a medical device, so medical diagnosis, oncology diagnosis company. And this is how I would expect a market evolution, a market cap evolution to look like versus revenue. I'm not saying that it's, so when the revenue goes down, the market capitalization go down, that's because they are not selling anymore so much. Whereas here in our catalytics and so many others, we see revenues stable or increasing and the market capitalization not being following or not holding. And this, it means that they're not able to monetize. This means they're selling, but they're not keeping the money. That means this. I don't know why yet, or we maybe will never know, but this is what it means. So versus this medical company. And so going back to our Cardlytics, so this company is basically a company that is monetizing, that is providing targeted offers through collaboration with banks and with financial institutions. And then through their own network, they're providing, based on the consumer purchasing history, kind of offers of targeted ads in the form of cashbacks rather, as well as analytics. So we have typically our kind of digital company that is analyzing personal data. So back here, so what happened here, so we can figure out, for example, if we read their investor communications, they refer to something called the cookie apocalypse, which we know. So basically one of the first understanding of why small companies suffered more than others was that they were not able to adjust to the privacy, the closing by the bigger companies that had first party data when they were not anymore able to access third party cookies information. So, and here again, this company refers to its communication to Apple, the change of policy by Apple in response, and the fact that they will be challenged. And they say, but we are better placed than other small companies. This will be difficult for small companies, but we're better placed than others to sustain this cookie apocalypse. And basically because we have our own network. But it didn't happen because they were not. So then again, so why put in perspective these smaller companies that kind of didn't fare so well, and some of them did okay, like Uplavin here, with the GAFAM? That's also because a lot of them refer to the GAFAMs in their communication. They really are dependent, and you can see it. And so what is interesting here, again, coming back to these smaller monetizing companies, privacy monetizing tech companies, is that you see they go down, but they don't all go down in the same way or in the same shape. If it would be just the cookie apocalypse, as they call it, and the privacy legislation, they would kind of all go down around the 2021 where we discuss it. But for example, if we were at Concentrics, they were kind of, you know, and you see a bit of seasonality, but reactions. So again, then we try to understand this dynamic. And for example, looking here at Match Group, the red line, which is the company that runs Tinder and other dating apps and apps, social apps. So we, for example, see that here, it's often the case when I look at these companies that the share prices are varying, so therefore the market capitalization in relation to the GAFAM. So here, for example, this share price where the red peak, the investor said, the commentary was, their prices are increasing because Google cut their the money they take off them. So again, confirming this idea that these companies are really living in the ecosystem that is orchestrated by the bigger companies, and that they're so dependent. So if Google decides to lower their cut on their app store on Google Play, then from 30 to 15 here, that will be really have a good effect on these companies. Nevertheless, again, the company kind of, the market valuation goes down again. So final example, before I get to the kind of, is Jamf. And Jamf Holding is a company that is doing products to adjust the Apple products to corporate needs, to needs of companies that are corporate. This is just a description from Wikipedia. They're basically offering a product for corporations that is helping them with their Apple devices. And so this is really, again, a very clear case of sales going up and their value going down. Okay, the white is the value of the company. So they basically go down, sorry, I should look. So they basically at some point reached 6 billion valuation, and they're now down to 2 billion. And while their sales continued to increase. And so here, the difference is that we have this peak here, like we didn't have it in others. So it was kind of nice to understand what was going on. And here, if we look at what was going on, is that Apple introduced a product to compete with them. And basically they kind of, and they lost 10%. And so what is also interesting is that this product, according to investors, was actually very inferior to the Jamf product. So what happened is that Jamf in January of 2021 announced, now we have so many users dealing with these Apple products. And so a few months later, Apple introduces a product, which according to this Barclays analyst was actually not very good, and they're not very worried. Nevertheless, this is what happens to Jamf, and this is what happens to Apple. So basically, we see then this interaction at different levels. It's not only about privacy regulation that they're not able to absorb or co-opt. It's not only about the fact that they're not in control completely of their environment. It's sometimes also actions by the bigger companies. And so from here, we try to conceptualize basically why, and to be confirmed, we find that bigger companies are better able to appropriate themselves this surveillance premium, to be confirmed. And these are the different possibilities of how to explain that. One of them is that a lot of the companies we've been seeing are just part of the ecosystem. They just control one part, like they would be doing the analytics, or they would be doing the supply side platform, but not having what we call the full stack. So this is something we published with there's a working paper with Joanna Bryson and other co-authors, where we explain that basically some companies like Google and Facebook, we are not the ones to explain that, but as well we represent, as others know, that there is these companies that are able to integrate vertically the ad stack. This is the famous ad stack. So maybe
Helena, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you just maybe wrap up in a minute so that we can move on to the Q&A? Great.
Yeah, I will. So basically, to cut this long story short here, I think we have also a company which did the same thing exactly, that has the entire ad stack, which is called Nexen. So that will not explain. So the explanations that we will continue to explore will be the fact that these bigger companies have monopoly rents and are able to siphon off this premium through basically because the existing regulation does not fully address their monopoly power. And the other interesting thing we will try to conceptualize is the political power of these companies. So them having been able to co-opt privacy legislation, and also the fact that they have a more direct partnership relationship with states when it comes to privacy data, where states we know are actually also keen to tap into this data. That will be one conversation, but I don't think it will be necessarily the determinant one. And indeed, I think coming to the discussion, let me just say, so what we constructed so far is kind of a naive index of this intensity of the use of personal data relying on privacy. And using this naive index, which, to be very open, is just the count of the references to privacy over the period, we do find significance on the half, on these 1,000 companies that we gathered so far, of there being a greater growth associated with more intensely referring to privacy and personal data, therefore, and higher market capitalizations. What I think, and I hope you will be interested to see when we get there, is the evolution in time of this privacy premium. Was it there? Did it disappear? Did it get accapared by the GAFAM? And who benefits? And if the data allows, with the help of, I should say, Willow from the data lab at Hertie School, we will also try to layer the data so that to see how this at the sector level, maybe the sector benefits and the GAFAM benefit from others using personal data. Voila.
Thank you so much, Helena. Fantastic insight into your research. And now over to Andrea for your discussion, your comments.
Thank you. Let me try to share my slides. Don't worry, it's just 6 slides. Let me see if this works. I'm going to move this over here. On this, and then let me try to see if I can share PowerPoint. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see your slides, Andrea.
Fantastic. So it's a real pleasure to discuss this paper. It's a very interesting topic and a very interesting research idea. It's preliminary, and in fact, the slides have changed from in the past 2 days, so my response will only be partial. There's new exciting material that Helena has introduced. So this is about the idea of surveillance capitalism, the idea that firms are monetizing our personal data by monitoring our activity, and this has opportunities. Maybe we're going to get products that fit our needs better, but there's a whole host of concerns that could be potentially very large. Is threats to privacy, potentially freedom, sensitive data. It could lead to behavioral manipulations. It could lead to social manipulations, political informations, and there's now some evidence about mental well-being. So very important issues. And what this paper does is it explores this large question from one particular perspective, which I think is very important, is the perspective of the kind of the supply of this surveillance, and it's how much are companies benefiting from monetizing our personal data, which companies are benefiting, and what does that depend on? I think that can shed a lot of light on what's going on. Their methodology uses financial data and uses performance data and valuation data, so revenues in particular and stock prices, capitalization. And it does, the methodologies divides as like 3 groups of companies. There's a target group, and these are companies that engage in privacy monetizing activities. And we want to figure out how they evolve over time. But of course, we want to do that against some control groups. And one control is companies that are not engaging in these activities. And the second group is the large, the tech titans, so GAFAM, Alphabet, Amazon, Meta, Apple, and Microsoft. There's a much very interesting aspect of this methodology. One is that these privacy monetizing companies are identified through investor calls. So that's very, I think, very interesting. So what are the preliminary insights? They're very interesting because they point at some tension here. So when you look at these target companies, their revenues seems to be growing up, or at least not going down. So good news for them, at least. But what we find is that their valuation actually seem to be U-shaped. So they seem to be going up in the beginning, but then they go down. They underperform. They underperform both controls basically in the long term. So why? Why are these things going in different directions when sort of basic finance should tell us that they should be going in the same direction? And here, Helena kind of identifies 3 possible hypotheses. The tech titans are controlling the whole value chain. There are some other monopoly rents that are associated with size, or there is another size channel, market power channel, which is the political power of GAFAM. They're somehow moving regulation to their advantage. So my comments are gonna focus on these explanations, and I'm gonna try to add some questions and comments. So one issue, and I think maybe Helena, given your experience as a regulator in a very important position at DG Com, you have a particular view on this. And there is now evidence coming out that privacy regulation can affect market power. In which way? So there's Frey and Presidente, for instance, show that the GDPR reduced profits for did not reduce sales. So this is your revenue story, but it did reduce profits for IT firms. But that did not happen. The evidence is weaker, but did not happen for the very large firms. So there's some potential channel here is actually privacy regulation creates some advantage for a larger firm, comparative advantage for larger firms. Indeed, another paper, Johnson, Schreiber, and Goldberg, finds that GDPR created a increased market concentration among web technology services. So can privacy regulation hurt small tech and benefit big tech? And here there are kind of two stories that one can tell, at least two stories. One is that you simply have fixed compliance costs, and fixed costs tend to favor large firms. The other one is that you have a comparative advantage for larger data ecosystem. So here, kind of my questions is, do you think regulation played a role here? And can your data shed light on this issue? In particular, I was thinking, given that you have this wonderful investor call data, you can now use various forms of machine learning to kind of extract what they were talking about. And we can see whether we see that the size is playing an effect on this. There is a sense, there's some sense to me that big tech was very opposed to privacy regulation up to a point. And then I think the light went on and they realized that it was a good thing for them. It's a very interesting thing, and maybe you can document that. The other bit, and I'm very interested in this, is what some people now are calling political antitrust. This goes back to Louis Brandeis, and it's the idea that if you have a big firm, the big firm can be a problem, not just because they have a lot of market power and they increase the prices of what we buy, they give us worse quality, but also because a big firm has the incentives and the means to influence the political process. So market power translates into political power. And in this case, there is a sense that big tech try to influence legislation to its advantage. So I have a paper on this, which actually is with Tommaso Valletti, who I believe you overlapped at DG Comp, right? So Tommaso was the chief economist at DG Comp for some years. And out of his experience, together with other things, grew this project. And this project asks, is it true that market power translates into political power? And you have a causality problem here, which one comes first? And so to get a handle on that, we look at some discrete events that increase market power all of a sudden, and these are mergers. So what happens in a merger? You have two firms, and they were lobbying before, and we can measure their lobbying activity before. Then they merge, and we can measure the lobby activity of the merged entity. We do that in the US with 20 years of data. And the question is, does the lobbying spending of the merged entity, is it larger than the sum of the spending of the two entities? And the answer is yes. By a large amount, it's about $150,000 a year on average, and so this seems to indicate that some of this channel is present. And if we look at Europe, we do see this effect. So here is something from Transparency International, and you see that when you look at the 10 largest firms in terms of lobbying in Brussels, you find 4 of the GAFAM there: Meta at number 2, Google at number 3, Microsoft at number 4, and Apple at number 8. So you do see, and 10 years ago, you would not have seen that. Finally, and this is my last point, I would like to, so sorry, here, the question is, again, using your beautiful data, can you try and document this strategy, perhaps by investor calls, with reference to or political risk, regulation, trying to influence this. I think it could be possible. They would maybe call it dialogue with decision makers or something like this. It's possible to maybe find this, and I think that would be very, very interesting. Finally, I want to take advantage of having you here to ask sort of the broad question. And you have a lot of experience as a regulator in really what was a central place for that, and you have now this great analysis. So, what should we do? And in particular, what should we do with respect to the link between regulation and market power? We are regulating things to protect consumers, privacy and various other things. We're worried about surveillance, but at the same time, we're worried about excessive concentration. Given your experience, what can help us? Stronger privacy protection, but in what way? Can we perhaps empower users? Would that be a way to get both less surveillance and less market power? Is there some antitrust action that would make sense? What about interoperability and open source, or maybe something else that is not currently on the table? So ideas from you would be great to have. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you, Helena. Please feel free to jump in with questions, but in the meantime, as you start to gather your thoughts, and Joanna, maybe I'll draw you in a minute, but I do want to give Helena a minute or two to just reflect on the response she just received.
Thank you, Andrea. This was so thoughtful, and indeed, I want to praise the work you did with Tommaso on the lobbying. I'm fully aware of it, and I think this is why we do know that there is a political power, and this is building up on a lot of concerns. I think what will be interesting here is this: if there is this premium that moves maybe in time, and there is a monopoly problem, and there is a problem of privacy data contributing to it. If you scrap the monopoly problem, will we still be a privacy problem? Because to what extent did the privacy through the co-opting become an instrument for keeping and building higher guardrails around the monopoly of some of these players? And I think when you ask about solutions, I think the DMA is going a long way into trying to address this in a more holistic way. But I do think when I see in particular this correlation between the market caps of the GAFAM, they're not in the same business. Some are doing hardware, some are doing software, some are doing ad stack, some are doing cloud, mostly, or some are doing a marketplace with balance sheet risks. Why are they so correlated? When I see this correlation, I don't see markets, I see power. And I think, and unfortunately, a lot of the way we are approaching with the tools we have, the analysis of markets is very fragmented, and this bigger picture does not always come through with the economic tools we have. I think I will leave the rest of, in terms of empowering users, I think the only thing I can say is I think there is a risk of having tiers of consumers, and the more, especially in privacy, the more fragile consumers kind of being cajoled to sell their data, but I don't think that's a solution. And there has been some literature, in particularly, for example, Julian Novak, who started to look into segments of consumers, vulnerable consumers. So I think as we would go into this direction, we should be very careful about not giving the impression that now consumers have choice, if it's a real choice. But I will leave the floor to others because
Joanna,
thank you.
You want to come in and introduce yourself?
Do you want me to go?
Yes, please.
Okay, sorry. I didn't. So first of all, thank you. It's been a great talk and great discussant, and I really appreciate that. I sort of want to come back to Andrea's first point, although I agree the second 2 points are important too. For those of you who don't know, Helena is like, I think I was just thinking about it. I think the majority of the empirical papers I've done since coming to Hertie School were with her as a co-author, because I've been spending so much time on regulation, and her stuff is so relevant, and so she keeps pushing. You can see what she's like. So the papers come out, or my other papers don't always get out as timely as they should. Anyway, the point is that we've discussed a little bit before about like sort of the aggregation through mergers that allows the overcoming of some of the privacy regulation. So I was thinking in particular that indeed, so first of all, the question I had in the comment there was that teasing out whether it's the privacy regulation itself perversely making it harder for small companies to exploit their private data, but not larger companies. You might be able to track that by looking, for companies that started a few years earlier, and are they different from ones that started now? So do you get the same trajectory, or is it rather that no matter when you started, there was a point where they started losing value? And then but the other comment was that basically maybe the privacy regulation is working on smaller companies because they aren't able to get the kind of information that allows them really to do surveillance that works, except when there's mergers that bring two different sets of data together and really give you more exploitable value. So it's just a thought. I suspect your power answer is the real answer, but just two thoughts about how to look at that first comment. Yeah, Andrea. Sorry, bye, Andrea.
Andrea or Elena, do you want to come back in with this?
I think Helena should go first.
Okay. I wanted to, yes, I didn't react to the event analysis. I think this is why I'm very excited to have Maggie, Phoebe, and Thames gathering this database, because I do think it will hopefully unleash more research. I did take note of you saying, can you look for power indications or kind of co-opting the political, the decision-making, the legislative process. I think that there will be scope for event analysis, which is the one that you will be identifying specific legislation coming into place, whether there was a reaction. It's usually more high frequency data when it comes to the stock exchanges, so it's a different exercise. But I think actually some of our joint students with Joanna were looking into that, I think, and there are other people looking into that on the impacts of individual privacy legislation. Why I think it's power is because there are these reactions to at different moments. And indeed, what you are saying, Joanna, is sometimes they were introduced in the market at different points in time, and then kind of at some point they started to do less well. And it's not the same point, but it's voila. So I do think there are indications, like you said, we'll try to document them through the review of the communication. That it's more than just the cost, the non-scalable cost of putting in place a procedure to monitor and to comply, the compliance procedure with the new privacy legislation.
Danny, come on in, please.
Sure. Helena, I think one of your first sentences was raising the possibility of regulation actually targeting or somehow giving disincentives for micro-targeting. And I was wondering if Alan Borning, who is also here today, he wrote a paper together with Marvin Landwehr and Volker Wolf, where he investigated different alternative business models, and kind of that also relates to Andrea's last question about this question, what should we do? So provided that your empirical data will actually reveal that there are some real issues regarding the micro-targeting or data-driven business model that is laid out in surveillance capitalism, what would be some alternatives? I was wondering if Ellen, maybe you want to talk about, as far as you remember, because that paper has been published for a while, but maybe Ellen, you want to come in here and just share some of your results?
Yeah, thank you. So Alan Borning from University of Washington. I think as came up in the slide, some of the alternatives would be open source, NGOs, even direct government provision of these services. As this talk makes clear, this is an exceedingly hard problem, and then attempts to make things right with, for example, with better privacy regulation can backfire. I want to push back on the idea also of allowing people to monetize their data and sell it. For one thing, it just seems evil. It's like, well, we should probably monetize slavery or something like that, to take a really extreme example. Plus, it's also the data gets smeared around so much that it's not quite clear where the revenues would flow. But anyway, I'll put a reference in the chat to that paper that Danny mentioned.
Oh, I just linked it, Ellen, so never mind. But
Helena, thank you. Okay.
Helena, do you want to respond to that? What is your current thinking about alternatives?
I mean, I think, okay, this is a bit maybe a cynical view of veteran regulator, but there is a true discrepancy in power between the big companies and everybody else, and therefore, if you give them legislation to protect privacy, they will kind of get it on their terms. And so I am kind of inclined to explore this idea, but just very personal, at the personal level, of indeed prohibiting basically the use of personal data, the sale of personal data, a little bit like what Alan Borning was saying. And I think it is seen as a radical idea now, but if really there would be some more evidence that this is not helping anyone but the GAFAM to keep where they are and keep everybody else out, I think we should relativize the benefits in terms of innovation that sometimes people are bringing in. I want to say something. The research on this is very polarized. And I'm kind of doubling in different areas of research, being a hobby academic, right? And you kind of see AI, you see all kind of different areas of governance research. But this specifically is very polarized, meaning there will be professors who are, like, sometimes if I say, oh, I'm doing this research in the context of Shoshana Zuboff's book, there'll be people who don't want to talk to me out of some of the published names in the overview list that I cited in the beginning. So I think there will be a big gap between also research that is, again, there are conflicts, be it only in terms of data access, and it will be interesting to try to bridge that gap. But for the moment, I personally, again, maybe being cynical, I don't see the reason why we should not at least explore more this thought of prohibiting fully this type of transacting in personal data. Of course, that it will come down to what is personal data and so on, but that's a different question. And in terms of interoperability, yes, of course, as much as we can. But I know that the open source community thinks that interoperability can solve, every problem of the world. And I wish it would be true. I think it needs a push at least. And but I do think there should be flanking measures in terms of interoperability. But it will not be enough given where we are, given not only where we are in terms of technology and regulation, but also just the entrenched positions of power.
Just a quick question on my end. So if GDPR hurt small tech and perhaps benefited very large firms, does the design of the DSA and the DMA, focusing on very large online platforms, does it possibly control to that, or do you think you're going to see a repeat of the same problem?
I think there is a bit of an ambition to be an antidote, right? I mean, that is a little bit the ambition of the DMA. I'm quite hopeful. I like I'm not working on the DMA. The DMA is good, and I think it will be a lot in the enforcement. And I think there have been already some articles by observers about how much some of the enforcement started to be, and the big tech started to try to co-opt it, and some of the representatives of small technology in the conversations with the regulator turned out to be kind of indirectly sponsored by the big tech. So I think it requires a lot of vigilance, and I do think there's a huge place for civil society, such as Article 19 that is organizing a DMA workshop themselves without funding from companies and such. So I do think it's still in the making to see where it will land, but I think it's the right direction and ambition. I'm slightly hopeful about the DMA.
Great, thank you.
cautiously
Let's take a really quick question from Joanna, and then I'm going to turn it to Andrea, and then turn it back to Danny to bring us to a close. So Joanna, please.
Maybe I should let Andrea go first, but since we only have so much time, I'll just say quickly. No, let Andrea go first. Sorry.
Mine's a very quick one, and I mean, when you see very powerful firms, one solution we've had for now 100 years is to have unions. So you want, if you have a powerful firm, you want a union to have enough power on the other side. And so there's this idea of data unions, and I'm wondering if if you have any thoughts about that.
Joanna. Joanna, you want to take the last word?
Basically, I have two last points. One is the thing about the GDPR being really bad for small businesses is sort of a myth. It actually isn't very expensive to do the compliance, but what happened is that small companies panicked because they didn't understand what was going on with it, and so some of them did overexpend, and actually a lot of them just made a lot of noise because they knew they weren't expending at all, and they're just afraid. So with the AI Act, there's been a lot of efforts to produce adequate public goods so that the small companies, SMEs, can learn how to do this correctly and not overextend and not panic and everything else. But actually, the European markets have grown. I mean, obviously, the big tech grew. I mean, the whole point of the GDPR was to create a harmonized market, and it did, and everybody benefited from that. And so actually, when you look at there's some papers, and if you want, I can send them around, but there's papers in the last few years that have shown that the digital economy has done extremely well in the EU. It benefited everybody. It was a win-win, and people like to see this as zero-sum, and it isn't. The comment about interoperability is that sometimes when people think interoperability will solve all the problems, they're forgetting that not every company has the same kind of data. And if it's not, I mentioned in the thing here, I'm not even sure I believe the market capital data anyway, because there's so much bubbles, and you just look at what the cost of Tesla since Trump won. I mean, it has nothing to do with cars, right? So like that. I'm not even sure. Maybe we should just be going by the revenue and not by the valuations. And I'll buy stock in these companies that Helena's identified as being undervalued. But nevertheless, if it's true that the privacy legislation is restricting the value of these smaller companies, it's precisely because the data they have is only good for one thing. And so you don't want every company to all have the same data, and interoperability therefore doesn't solve the problem because the companies are not exchangeable with each other and their data is not exchangeable. They're retaining different kinds of data, and we want that. The ideal is that they have as little data as they can possibly have and still operate. So.
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks to the audience for raising these great questions. Thank you, Helena, for putting this onto our agenda today. I particularly liked this question you raised about who is benefiting, because I think that will be particularly interesting to see precisely who is the beneficiary in all of that and what is the power relationship then. And I want to thank Andrea for also your thoughts and insights in the comments. Your questions were very helpful. And your point about data unions, I have to read up on those. On that note, we're going to continue with the speaker series in January 22nd, same time. Anu Bradford from Columbia University is going to talk about tech governance trade-offs. So I hope you will spend some more time with us to continue this discussion.